electronic meeting.
Thank you, Councillor Parrish. My name is Stephanie Jurius. Good morning to all. I'm going to provide a very shortened review of the protocols for electronic participation in this committee meeting. As a result of the rapid growth in COVID-19 cases, the committee chair and I will conduct and participate in this meeting remotely. The CAO and executive leadership team will also continue to participate remotely. As this is the first time that we are conducting the Planning and Growth Management Committee meeting in this matter, we ask that you be patient with us while we navigate through the technology. The recommended view to ensure a full view of the presentation slides is the stack or side-by-side view, which can be accessed through the stage layout. If you wish to speak, please raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon located to the right of your name in the participant list. Speakers will be determined based on members who have raised their hand using the icon. Recorded votes are not allowed at committee meetings. The committee chair or I will call for any objections. If you have an objection, please indicate your name and your objection. If no objections are stated, the motion will be deemed to be approved. If you are participating electronically and are leaving the meeting, please send an email to council@peelregion.ca to indicate that you are leaving the meeting. If you leave the meeting for any votes thereafter, you will be marked as absent. We shall now commence the meeting with the roll call. Please indicate your presence by responding here when called upon. Councillor Carlson.
You're supposed to respond here.
Councillor Carlson.
I'm not live here, sorry. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Fortini. Councillor Fortini. He's not here at the moment. Chair Yanika.
Here.
Thank you. Councillor Innes.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Kiernan.
Good morning, here.
Thank you. Councillor Medeiros.
Here.
Thank you. Councillor Parrish.
Here.
Thank you. Councillor Starr.
Present.
Thank you. Mayor Thompson.
Present. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Vicente.
Present.
Thank you. I'll try Councillor Fortini again. Councillor Fortini. He's not here at the moment. I've noted the other councillors present are Mayor Brown and Councillor Downey. Are there other councillors present?
Yeah, Mayor Brown is here.
Thank you.
Yes.
Hi there. Yeah, and Councillor Dasco.
Thank you.
Councillor Sinclair.
Thank you. Thank you. You will be noted as present in the minutes. Councillor Parrish will now preside over the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. I'd like to move to approval of the agenda, and Stephanie has quite a few additions to read out to us.
Thank you, Councillor Parrish. The clerk's office received 3 delegation requests and 13 communication items after the revised agenda was distributed on Monday, April 26th. So I will now read the approval of agenda. That the agenda for the April 29th Planning and Growth Management Committee meeting include delegations from Kathleen Molesky, retiree, regarding the Peel 2041 Plus work plan and timeline update and the land needs assessment and intensification analysis. Item 4.5, Rahul Mehta, resident, City of Mississauga, regarding the Peel 2041 Plus work plan and timeline update and the land needs assessment and intensification analysis. Item 4.6, Sylvia Roberts, resident, City of Brampton, regarding land needs assessment and intensification and growth management. Item 4.7. And further, the agenda for the April 29th Planning and Growth Management Committee meeting include the following communications. Karen Allison, resident, Town of Caledon, requesting to delay decisions on the Region of Peel official plan review until the pandemic is resolved. Item 6.6. Rahul Mehta, resident, City of Mississauga, requesting to delay decisions on the Region of Peel official plan review until the pandemic is resolved. Item 6.7. Michelle Meandro, resident, Town of Caledon, requesting to delay decisions regarding the planning and growth management for the future of the region of Peel. Item 6.8. Vicky Tran, resident, City of Mississauga, requesting to delay decisions regarding planning and growth management for the future of the region of Peel. Item 6.9. Linda Lukasic, Executive Director for Environment Hamilton, regarding land needs assessment and intensification analysis. 6.10. Steve Clark, Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, regarding the Region Appeals Population and Growth Management Allocation by 2051, item 6.11. Alexandra Sardock, resident of City of Brampton, requesting to delay decisions on the Region Appeal Official Plan Review until the pandemic is resolved, item 6.12. Dr. Carol Aziz, resident City of Mississauga, requesting to delay decisions on the Region Appeal Official Plan Review until the pandemic is resolved, item 6.13. Jennifer Forestier, resident Town of Caledon, requesting to delay decisions on the Region of Plan Official Plan Review until the pandemic is resolved. Jennifer Jarisek, Planner, Policy and Advocacy, Building and Land Development Association, regarding the draft Inclusionary Zoning feasibility analysis and policy directions, item 6.15. Eileen Chan, the resident of City of Mississauga, requesting to delay decisions on the Region of Peel Official Plan Review until the pandemic is resolved. Sabrina Scotto, from Weston Consulting, on behalf of Tullamore Industrial Limited Partnership, regarding the Peel 2041 Work Plan and Timeline Update and the Land Needs Assessment and Intensification Analysis, 6.7. Matthew Corey from Malone Given Parsons, on behalf of Brook Valley Project Management, providing comments on Peel 2041 Official Plan Review, item 6.18. And further, that the agenda for the April 29th Planning and Growth Management Committee meeting be approved as amended. Are there any objections?
I have a question, Stephanie. How many
Okay.
people got all those additional letters? Did everybody get them?
Yes, it was sent around 9:12 this morning through Councillor Kiernan. Just this morning, just before the meeting.
Okay, I haven't received them, nor have I read them. So I am tempted at 9:12 this morning is a bit late. I was up at 6 this morning, and they've been sent to my staff. I should have gotten them, but I didn't. I am having difficulty receiving and accepting letters without having read them. So anybody else have the same problem?
It's Ron Starr. I haven't got them yet.
Yeah,
No, I don't.
I got
Yeah, so-
one, but not all of them.
It
Carolyn,
was-
just one.
Okay.
Yeah,
It
Carolyn
was-
Nando here. Carolyn
Yes.
Nando here. I agree with you entirely. I don't think that's appropriate either.
Okay.
Chair Parrish, can I ask that they just be deferred to the next meeting?
Yes. And I think when it comes time to approve that report, in fairness to all those letters, we will defer that to the next meeting. We'll go through it today, but I think any decisions or referrals to council will have to be deferred to the next meeting.
Okay.
This is not the fault of our staff. This is people putting letters in very late, but we still have to respect the fact that they went to the trouble of putting them in. So we will see how we can change that system and make sure people, when they send those letters in, if they don't come in until, if they don't come in 2 days before a meeting, you just have to respond immediately to say you can't put them on the agenda, because it's not fair to them and it's not fair to us.
Okay. So with that, Councillor Parrish, the main motion will then have to be approved by the committee, which reads that the agenda for the April 29, 2021 Planning and Growth Management Committee meeting be approved.
Now, is this with or without those letters?
Without those letters. And when you say defer, are you approving the delegations as well? Or deferring the delegations as well?
When did those requests come in, Stephanie?
Let me see. We received 4.5 Monday. We received 2 from Monday, and 1 was received last night.
Well, the 2 from Monday, I have no trouble with. The 1 from last night, we'll see if we're exhausted at that point, listening to everybody else.
Okay.
Let's put it out of fairness to someone who's actually clocked into this meeting. Is that okay with everybody? I see heads nodding, so we'll go ahead with all the applications. But again, the same rule. If we don't get them in 24 hours at least before the meeting, if not 48 hours, then tell them right away that it's too late to be on the agenda.
Okay, we'll do that.
Thank you,
So,
Stephanie.
I'll pass it on to you, Councillor.
Thank you. Now, can somebody move the agenda as described? Councillor Thompson, all those in favor? Any opposed? Thank you very much. And we will invite the first delegation, Phil Pothen.
Hello.
Chair Parrish, I can't hear the delegate.
Apologies, I forgot to unmute myself. Good morning, councillors. I'm Phil Pothen. I'm Ontario Environment Lead for Environmental Defence, which is a leading national environmental organization that works at the federal, provincial, and municipal levels to safeguard our fresh water, create livable communities, and tackle climate change and build a clean economy. I lead Environmental Defence's policy analysis, policy development, and advocacy around natural heritage, smart growth, and land use planning in Ontario. But I'm also a land use planning lawyer with over a decade of experience advising and litigating about the interpretation of Ontario's land use planning rules, including the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe. I'm speaking to you today in relation to the draft land needs assessment and intensification analysis that is set to be presented at item 5.2. With respect, both that analysis and the December 10th technical study from Hemson, which underlies it, are simply wrong. They are wrong in projecting a need for an additional 3,000 hectares of residential land and 1,200 hectares of employment land. And they are wrong in more than tripling the population of Caledon by allocating an additional $220,000 residents, 220,000 residents. They come to the wrong conclusion on both of these points because they treat, or at least they present, the land needs assessment methodology as some sort of predetermined and objective algorithm, and because they treat its inputs as though they're outside of Peel Region's control. The land needs assessment methodology actually leaves room for Peel to accommodate all of the region's projected population and job growth within its existing settlement area boundary. And that is what Peel Region should be doing. Firstly, that is because Peel Region and its component municipalities have already destroyed so much of Peel Region's agricultural land and natural heritage that every remaining hectare is worth fighting to preserve. Second, though, and please take note of this, the second reason is that the status quo in Peel Region's existing built-up areas, its existing neighborhoods, is not serving residents very well at all. The current the densities and the current use mixes are not working. And the proof of that is in the very low active transportation modal shares that Peel Region neighborhoods have as compared with other parts of the GTHA, and in particular Toronto. When you have low active transportation modal shares in a neighborhood, that shows that you don't have the density and mix of uses that's required, and it shows that you need to add more jobs to that neighborhood and increase the population density there. So while no decision is being taken here today, I would urge council to reject the approach taken to date, which is oriented towards a single, definitive, sprawling conclusion. And I ask that this committee direct staff to prepare an alternative option which proposes policy changes that will result in keeping the current settlement area boundary. To be clear, environmental defense and local community organizations are asking not for Peel Region to just defy the growth plan and land needs assessment methodology. My submission today is focused on explaining how the key steps in the mandatory land needs assessment process allow Peel Region the flexibility to accommodate projected growth without expanding outwards. So, as a starting point, the land needs assessment methodology and changes to the mandatory population projections in the growth plan seem calculated to railroad suburban municipalities into sprawling outwards, but they actually don't succeed in mandating that. The language of the growth plan projections and the prescribed methodologies don't actually prohibit Peel from accommodating growth in existing neighborhoods. And the other planning rules that apply, those in the provincial policy statement, the rest of the growth plan, and the Planning Act itself, they all militate strongly against outward expansion. The part of the land needs assessment methodology that we're dealing with here is only 7.5 pages long. And the real key part is only 1.5 pages long. And any other aspect of the assessment of housing need and the allocation of housing need that's not expressly spelled out in those documents is for this council to decide. Peel is not obliged, and please note this because I see you've gotten a letter from Minister Clark. Peel is not obliged to accept the stated views of the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing regarding its interpretation of this methodology. And Peel is emphatically not obliged to accept the estimates and projections in background reports prepared by Henson Consulting, either for Peel Region itself or for the province previously. We will the key aspects of the land needs assessment methodology are, and I'm going to outline these stages. They are estimating the proportion of the overall population that will fall into each age group by 2051. They're estimating, by taking into account these age distributions, how many households these people are likely to be divided into. It's estimating, and to some extent deciding, which of 4 categories of dwelling that people in these the homes that these people choose are likely to fall into. And it's deciding which lower tier municipality these units should be allocated to, and deciding how much of this supply in each of those housing types can be accommodated within the existing built-up area. So please note, each of these analytical stages hinges on inputs that are at minimum very uncertain. They leave a wide range of plausible options for this council to choose among. And for the most part, they're also very much within the capacity of this council to influence or even control through its policy decisions. Because it's entirely possible to correct estimates of the amount of land needed upwards later on, and it's much more difficult to retract approvals that have already been issued, council should be presented with the full range of uncertainty at each of these stages, and it should be given the opportunity to err on the side of avoiding outward expansion. And these reports failed to present those options and present that as uncertainty. So in particular, the future age distribution of Hamilton is highly uncertain. While the government projects the overall number of people in Peel Region, it doesn't say how we're to determine what age groups they're going to fall into. And that depends very much on immigration policy going forward. That uncertainty is not presented in these reports. Household formation rates, that is, how likely people in a certain age are to live in a separate household, are highly uncertain. And that's not taken into account in the reports. And in Hamilton in particular, it's very likely that those household formation rates are exaggerated. And that's because, for example, my family, my mom's brother lived in the same household as my grandmother for his entire life. He raised his kids there. the MPP for one of the ridings in Brampton. There's 3 households who are all sharing a house together. None of this is taken into account in the reports.
If I could, Bill,
Sorry?
you're
Yep.
getting into your 10-minute limit. Can you summarize, please? And I'm quite interested in what you've got to say. I would appreciate if you could send us a summary of what you've said today in writing.
Sure. So at each of the stages, and the last one is that, in particular, the categorization of housing types is within the discretion of Peel Region Council. And there is much more capacity to accommodate single-family homes within existing neighborhoods than the Hempson report or the report before it today acknowledges. You can classify garden suites and laneway suites as single-family homes. You can change your policies to allow more lot splitting, to allow semi-detached homes in single detached neighborhoods, and bring the densities of your low-density Peel Region neighborhoods up closer to levels that will actually support active transportation. And by doing that,
you're well over your 10 minutes.
You'll get where you need to go. Thank you.
Okay, got.
I'll be happy to answer any questions.
And I'm going to ask councillors to keep their questions, no long preambles, just questions, and keep them to well within 5-minute range with answers. And I'm going to start with Councillor Innes.
Thank you for your presentation. Have you ever represented, I see that it says that you're a lawyer, have you ever represented a planning application before the LPAT?
Yes.
And in your experience, when a non-decision is made by a municipality, which would happen if we do not have a confirmed official plan, either at the town or the region of Peel, and an application gets to the LPAT and is and complies with the growth plan and all provincial policy, what has been the experience in the rulings of LPAT? And do you not see that as a risk? Do you not see that? I'm sorry. And do you not see that as a risk for this municipality, in particular, the town of Caledon and the region of Peel, to take in having developers plan our communities rather than the community planning itself?
It depends on the merits of the application, and in this case, there's no merit to an application that would expand the urban boundary of Peel. So it's not like this is
even though they've been granted a 40-hectare approval through the growth plan, that is merit unto itself. So I'll leave it at that. But I do have some concerns, and I appreciate that you come out today, and I appreciate Environmental Defenses finally getting involved in this issue, because Caledon has been jumping up and down for quite some time on this matter, and I look forward to your written submission with more details. Thank you.
Hello?
I'm sorry, somebody muted me. There's some little gnome out there that mutes me when I don't want to be. Alan, do you want to ask a question?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. My question is, can you expand a little bit on, you were talking about the algorithm that Hempson and the planning units are using. So I'm looking, if that's not the algorithm, what's your suggestion?
So I'm saying there is not an algorithm. What the land needs assessment methodology prescribes is a series of questions that Peel Region needs to ask itself. But the way that it gets to the answers to each of those questions is very much within the discretion of Peel Region. And the process that is used in the Hempson report, both the previous Hempson reports that Hempson prepared for the province and the current Hempson report that was presented in December, is both very opaque, and also it fails to take into account at all the realities of Peel Region, which is that you have a lot of joint households, more and more joint households. You have great capacity within existing neighborhoods of Peel to accommodate more laneway, garden suites, and single-family homes. That's not taken into account in the approach. The algorithms if you were to actually make an honest projection of population going forward, you would project a wide range of possibilities. It would be between A and B. That's where the future age distribution would be. And you present that full range of age distributions to council and allow council to err on whichever side it chooses to err. Because reality, Hempson does not have a good record of projecting either population by region or population distributions. They got it very, very wrong in 2006. And that's why many municipalities across the Greater Golden Horseshoe area have not even come close to using up the land, which was recommended that they add before. But the problem is, the permissions have already been granted now, and we've been locked into approving much more developable land than we ever needed. So what we would suggest is that the full range of uncertainty be presented to Peel Regional Council on each of these stages, and that uncertainty be multiplied throughout the process so that there is the full range of potential land need that is plausible presented to Peel Regional Council, and that Peel Region have a debate on each of these questions. What is the population distribution likely to be in the future? And what is the household preference likely to be in the future? And it be acknowledged that Peel Region is deciding these things, and that Peel Region choose among the wide range of estimates of land need that are actually justified by the data. And our submission is that it should err on the side of avoiding a boundary expansion. Because if it proves that, we underestimated, then it's always possible to expand the boundary down the road. It's not possible to just demolish houses that have already been built, and it's very difficult to take away permissions that have already been granted to developers.
Okay, I'm going to interrupt here. Alan, do you have the answer to your question?
Not what I was looking for, but thank you.
You want to take one more short shot at what you were looking for?
Well, I think one thing is where I'm going, Carolyn, as you know, we Peel Data through Ron Gerald has done a terrific job and has fed a lot of that information, especially on multifamilies and different things, especially the issue in Brampton, especially for us to meet our wastewater and water needs, especially with more people living at home, especially with waste management and everything else. And I know that data was fed into Hempson, so that's why I was just wondering, okay, so obviously if you're saying that we're missing it, I just kind of wanted to have a better understanding where you were coming on the algorithm on that. And that's where I was just trying to get to, is I know we fed data in and this is what we've got back, but I'm just trying to get an understanding on that. That's where I was looking for.
I now understand your question a little better.
Bill?
Okay.
Bill?
Yes?
You do tend to ramble. You were very interesting, but I need you to give like a 3-sentence answer and pinpoint it.
Sure. If you look at the report that's being presented to you today, there are certain even verbal comments that are made there. First, they suggest that older people are likely to have much more housing need than their population going forward suggests, because they're going to quote unquote age in place. But what's not factored in.
You've been cut off.
Are likely to move to live with me. That's not factored in properly to the Hempson report.
Okay,
so that means that it's not a separate household.
Bill, I'm going to ask you to stop there. I'll repeat my request. If you can send in a written part of your presentation, we would appreciate it. Thank you very much for your delegation today. Next, we will go to...
sorry, Madam Chair, it's Stephanie. We just need a motion of receipt.
Okay, Alan's moving receipt. All those...
Thank you.
Anybody opposed? Carried. We'll go to 4.2, Kathleen Wilson. And we're watching the time. It is 1 minute past 10, so we'll go to 11 minutes past.
Oh, I won't be that quick, that long this morning. I'm actually trying to jump into a call. that I have to chair. So good morning, Planning and Growth Development Committee. And Regional Council. Thank you for letting me delegate on the concern. And one of the things that I'm concerned about is we need to define a hard urban boundary in Peel to stop the sprawl. And my concern is also in the defined needs for employment lands for the Peel region. I'm asking for the Peel region to put a pause on their official plan review until such a time as the pandemic is resolved or over. My concern is on the land needs assessment intensification analysis, and the employment lands required can't be appropriately addressed during this pandemic, and the public in Peel has not been given enough opportunities to review what these proposed changes will impact our future in Peel. 2051 is a long way away. So what I feel Peel needs to incorporate into the planning practices and some of the risks they need to address is food security, climate change targets, they're not really aligned to it, urban sprawl, loss of agricultural land and areas of environmental sensitivity, the future of work and education, and preserving areas of high vulnerability from development for profit. I think we need to look at an approach for Peel that will incorporate the future of employment needs. Many of us sitting here today, there's jobs 10 years from now that don't exist right now. And as a high-tech employee for over 28 years, I was distressed when my company, Microsoft, decided to leave Mississauga in the Peel region due to the lack of connected transit and the inability to attract young, new top talent to our company. Many of my peers and employees with six-figure salaries will no longer live in Peel region as their home and will move to Toronto or areas with better transit to support their commute and work-life balance. I was very proud that many of my peers moved to the Peel region, and including Caledon, to live, but many are selling their homes and moving to the Toronto area. So I think the definition of employment lands does need to take into account the work of the future. As currently right now, employment lands focuses on low density sprawl, warehousing, manufacturing, and not desirable income employment that can sustain families in Peel. I'm also sad that our employment goals only talk to some office and population related jobs. These jobs are not sustainable for residents to settle in Peel, purchase homes, and live in communities where they work. Again, these focus on employment lands such as warehouses, more carbon-based logistics, and does not enforce green requirements on companies to build up instead of out and use renewable energy instead of diesel trucks. With the intensification of warehousing, manufacturing, and logistics, the region of Peel will never make their climate change requirements in 9 years. Again, they realize it's 2051, but 9 years, we need to start planning it as a region right now to how we're going to implement climate change initiatives and enforce businesses to adopt green policies and operations. With COVID and recent trends, have more people like me working out of our homes. Working for Microsoft and myself commuting across the world to support our customers, transportation would be very beneficial for me to be able to get to Toronto in reasonable time and not be stuck in my car waiting to go downtown. I'm actually surrounded by neighbors who don't work in manufacturing, warehousing, or logistics, but live in Caledon, and they don't work in Caledon because there's no sustainable employment for their skilled labor. We need more skilled labor and employment in Peel to support families with higher income jobs so they can afford their homes and living expenses. All I've seen during this pandemic is MZOs and plans to build more carbon-emitting infrastructure and employment, which is hazardous to our health and our planet, sorry. I'm asking the region of Peel to define a hard urban boundary, hold off on destroying prime agricultural land to house logistics and warehousing. The region of Peel needs to modernize their planning practices as well, incorporate jobs of the post-COVID world. In 2051, many people will not be commuting to office, but using their homes as their place of employment and commuting to a hoteling experience to connect face-to-face with their peers once a week or a couple times a week. I know this because for over 9 years. We need to protect our rural boundaries from sprawl, industrial uses, and maintain our green space and food security. Canada needs to step up, and it starts at the municipal and regional level to make these drastic changes so we can reduce our emissions in 9 years. 9 years. It's not 2051. We have to reduce these in 9 years. I don't know if you're aware, but as Microsoft, we have actually committed to be carbon negative by 2030. Hence, one of the reasons why we're pushing for transit for employees to get to jobs. So modern planning, infill development, and stop our endless sprawl of low-paying employment lands and ensure a vital Peel for the future. Sustainable jobs for our residents. So again, I'm asking the Peel region to put a pause on the official plan review until such a time the pandemic is over and we can look at the real future of employment post-COVID and keep our prime agricultural and our Oak Ridges moraine safe. Making hasty decisions because there's an unplanned sense of urgency will have a massive impact on the future of Peel. And as I said, we will not sustain or even meet our climate change requirements. So again, we need to focus with planning with climate change in mind. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kathleen. I don't see any questions. I thank you very much for staying within your 10 minutes. You were actually 8. Thank you very much for being here today. Can Councillor Carlson move receipt of the delegation? Anybody opposed? Seeing none. Thank you very much, Kathleen.
Thank you.
We'll go to Kate Hepworth, President, Caledon Village Association. Kate?
Good morning, and thank you for letting me take this time.
Can you try to keep your presentation to 10 minutes, please?
Oh, there'll be no problem with that. Uncharacteristically, this is going to be extremely brief. I am asking that Peel Region put a pause on their official review until such time as the pandemic is resolved. I don't think that's unreasonable. The lands assessment intensification analysis cannot properly be addressed at this time. We're all aware of COVID, but let's not push stuff through just because of COVID. The region of Peel won't be the first in line to recognize that growth plans are inappropriate in this time, but you could be next. You could take that next step and follow some other areas with this thought. Ontario loses approximately 175 acres of farmland per day, equivalent to 132 football fields. It's really time to rethink this process. The cumulative repercussions will be devastating. 100 acres here, 100 acres there. This builds, and the ability to rein this in is yours. I'm asking respectfully that you listen to the delegates and follow through with making that decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. Does anyone have any questions? Seeing none, Councillor Kiernan, would you move receipt of the delegation? Any objections? Thank you very much, Kate, and thank you for being so brief and to the point.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And we will go to Jennifer Laforcier, resident, Town of Caledon.
Good morning, Chair and Councillors. I hope you can hear me okay.
And we're going to try to, Jennifer, you're just heading around 10 after 10. We're going to cut you right off at 10:20.
Perfect. Good morning. I'd like to delegate regarding item 5.1 and 5.2. As you're aware, the province has revised municipal planning guidelines to include population projections to 2051. They've lowered density targets for new development and enacted a market-driven approach to planning for new residential areas. Frankly, it's a sprawl bonanza. We're requesting the Peel region delay the official review plans. The region of Halton voted unanimously to pause their on February 17th, and we believe Peel must follow suit. Halton on April 21st and Hamilton on March 29th have also passed motions to put an option on the table for a fixed urban boundary. Constituents cannot be properly consulted given COVID restrictions. Many residents do not have internet access or lack the expertise to use Zoom or WebEx software in order to delegate. Critical decisions which will impact Peel region for the next 30 years should not be made while in-person consultation is impossible and the pandemic is raging during its third wave. I'm aware that there are political reasons for forging ahead to solidify the OP before 2022. However, Canada is still a democratic country. If taxpayers can be muted and booted, then consultation is not occurring in a fair, just way. WebEx is not a substitute for public engagement. For this action to be effective, councils around the Golden Horseshoe should pass similar motions, and as it started in Halton, we hope it can continue in Peel and beyond. We need to preserve our existing farmland. Already, as Kate just mentioned, 175 acres are lost per day. Farmland is a diminishing non-renewable resource. The new market lens prioritizes low-density growth on farmland. We must not lock in sprawl. The best option for our region is to freeze the urban boundary, drive new development within the existing built-up areas. Low-density residential development is an economic disaster as well as an environmental one. If you look at the pictures I've provided, please let me take you on a quick tour of how sprawl is impacting our headwaters and all of our drinking water. If we continue to build out into the Greenbelt, the Oakages Moraine, and the Niagara Escarpment, storm runoff from impermeable surfaces will only increase as the effects of climate change grow. Transportation emissions from these developments will prevent us from reaching our climate targets. We have more than enough land within the current urban boundary to develop complete, self-sustaining communities for future growth until 2031 and should have the flexibility to plan for 2041 once life is settled and the pandemic has passed. There are significant urban and tourism pressures on groundwater and surface water in the Upper Credit River watershed. As residents and councillors downstream, you should be aware of these impacts before approving more sprawl. The safety of our drinking water should be the first impact that is considered for every taxpayer in the region of Peel. To quote the article in The Pointer that was published last night, in 2018, the IPCC pointed the finger of blame squarely at the local planning process in a report that warned the planet was warming even faster than previously feared. Approving sprawling subdivisions, as Peel has done in the past, leads to major climate problems. Large suburban homes force residents into the car, make public transit inefficient to run, and require significant energy to heat and cool. The more square footage used in each house and each individual, the worse it is for our planet. The expansion of the Orangeville sewage treatment from 13 million to 17 million has put Island Lake at near flushing capacity. The population will grow from 27,000 to 35,000 with the expansion. The growth in neighboring municipalities like Mono and Orangeville, the Adama Winery, a new sports college on Porterfield Road between Alton and Orangeville, the Melville Golf Development, 27 holes plus accommodation that will be on septic and communal systems, not to mention the 300-acre pit expansion extracting under the water table that was recently approved by James Dick. These have all contributed stressors. Subwatershed number 17 is further affected by leakage from closed landfill sites south of Highway 24 beside the Credit River. Shaw's Creek will be impacted by expansion of the Millcroft Inn, and on the Humanic, Lebowski, and Grant subdivision lands will lead to closure of Alton wells, with supply to come from Caledon wells on Highway 10. These wells will become critically important for supplying Alton. When you visualize the proposed CBM just west of Shaw's Creek and the new Lafarge operation beside Lake, Caledon will host a pit that runs from Shaw's Creek Road west to the second line east of Highway 10. No agency has ever undertaken a cumulative impact study of aggregate operations on ground and surface water in the town of Caledon, although the Credit River Alliance pushed CBC to do so. On Tuesday, was presented that is included in to refer to the Peel Caledon Aggregate Policy Official Plan Review. Please see attached, as well as the letter from our MP, who is concerned about the security of wells downstream of the Olympic pit. There was a small win in 2017 with the implementation of Shaw's Creek Subwatershed Report, resulted in at least an acknowledgement, and it stated that CVC and municipal partners should develop an implementation and management plan for the aggregate operations from the Shaw's Creek Subwatershed and neighboring influence subwatersheds. The implementation and management plan should better understand the cumulative impacts of aggregate extraction and develop holistic rehabilitation plans that ensure the area provides overall benefit to the natural heritage system. Regarding water taking permits, they recommended a comprehensive review of cumulative impacts given the critical role Shaw plays providing base flow, critical for maintaining water quality in the river and diverse aquatic ecosystems. The CVC has been following a three-phase subwatershed planning process over the last 2 decades. It is complete for key watersheds, subwatersheds in the Upper Credit, and it's not apparent that completed plans are being updated. Example, the credit plan phase 1 was done in 1988. The Orangeville subwatershed process is not complete. Subwatershed 18 and 16, which includes Caledon Village, was done in 2001. They're out of date. Source water protection planning continues, but the relationship between the two processes is unclear. Accountability for required protection and mitigation is unclear. Key element is identification of source water protection plumes for municipal wells. These appear to be ignored when it comes to accommodating development. For example, the proposed developments in Alton will affect the 2 local wells, and we even told the water will come from the Caledon wells near Highway 10. The big unknown is what happens if these wells are negatively impacted by development in and around Caledon Village. Meanwhile, communities go to LPAT at the cost of $35,000 a day. According to the 2020 Region of Peel Water Quality Report for Caledon Village, the Alton drinking water produced enough from the system to supply 4,900 people. Caledon Village wells 3 and 3B are screened within an unconfined sand and gravel aquifer, into groundwater under direct influence of surface water. Caledon well number 4 is screened within a confined aquifer and also deemed a GUDI with effective in-situ filtration. Alton wells number 3 and 4A are screened with a confined sand and gravel aquifer. Alton is linked to Caledon Village wells and can feed to Alton, not the reverse, as Caledon at a higher elevation. Another boondoggle impacting the credit is the wastewater treatment plant that will dump 72 million liters of effluent in the Region of Peel border. Downstream, this will create a dead zone for the water trap. This proposal has resulted in calls for a federal environmental impact assessment that is so dire, Conservatives in the Green Party agreed to present a petition at the House of Commons. The point is that a lot of these approvals have been happening without the underpinning research being done by the CDC or the town. Development proposals are considered as one-offs. A clear plan or accountability for the infrastructure capacity that will be needed to protect these critical natural heritage assets. It is also not clear how much water is in the upper watershed, its importance, or how many and what kind of users water by municipalities, aggregate extraction, tourism, golf courses, agriculture can be managed without negatively impacting the resource. The Greenbelt expansion does not address the degradation of natural heritage systems, and it is up to this region to implement strong municipal policies. Recent license approval was granted at LPAT for extraction under the water table for plus years in an ecologically sensitive area, part of the UNESCO World Biosphere in Bellefontaine. Proponent plans to extract material at an annual rate of 1.8 million per year. A license for 321 hectares of land is sought in Cataract by St. Mary's. License application is 1 year away. Studies have shown that quarries impact wells. The fly rock from CB will impact the entire community of Cataract and their house valuations. AM has stated at public meetings that they intend to pump into the credit. They have been drilling, and residents have already noticed the ponds have disappeared on the Cataract Trail. So I'm going to summarize because I know we're running out of time. In conclusion, my argument is that the watershed is in dire straits, and the sprawl that is being proposed is not helping. The fixed urban boundary is where we need to go because this is drinking water for the entire Peel region. Thank you.
Hey, are there any questions for Jen? I know it's not my job to coach the delegations, Jennifer, but we got your written material and you speed read that so that it was very hard to follow. Plus you were clicking in and out, your internet was clicking in and out. For future delegations, when you give us extensive written material, you don't have to read it to us. You can just go through and speak more slowly and have a little bit more of an impact. That's the teacher in me. Okay, Councillor Medeiros, would you move receipt of the delegate? Councillor Starr, will you move? Oh, Medeiros? Got it. Anybody opposed? Yeah, thank you very much, Jennifer. Okay, next we have Kathleen Molesky.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, Kathleen, and you've got you've got 10 minutes, which would be 10:30.
Okay, I shouldn't be that long. Good morning, Council, and thank you for hearing me today. My name is Kathleen Molesky. I'm a resident of Ward 2 and have lived in Clarkson and Lorne Park areas of Mississauga for over 32 years. In January, I retired from TD Bank, where I worked for 14 years as a manager and project manager in information technology. I've always been concerned about the preservation of the environment and climate change. In my retirement, I have decided to focus my energies on advocating for resolving the climate emergency. I have become a member of Lead Now and GASP and a team leader for the newly formed Mississauga, Oakville, Burlington, and Hamilton chapter of For Our Kids. All three organizations are part of a larger network of organizations in Canada championing the need to address climate change for a healthier, cleaner, and livable world. I'm asking Council today to support the motion to pause their official plan review until the pandemic is resolved. At this time, people are distracted by the upheaval that the pandemic has caused to their daily lives. Many who at the best of times may not be aware of such things like the recently introduced changes to the municipal planning guidelines and their implications are even less aware of them during the pandemic. Further, consultations with Peel Region constituents are needed, but the pandemic makes it difficult to carry out these consultations. Online meeting and conferencing technology like Zoom, while extremely helpful in connecting people during these times when we need to distance, has its limitations, and consultations via Zoom meetings are not as effective as in-person meetings. The changes introduced by the current government have far-reaching implications to people's health and welfare and need to be given proper due course for consideration and debate by the public. Only in-person meetings are effective for public consultations. I also ask Council to support the motion of adding a new option to their land use planning to establish a fixed urban boundary to curb sprawl and protect what little farmland is remaining in Ontario. The existing options in the OPR all include expansion into prime farmland, meaning more roads, more housing, more cars, and the disappearance of precious farmland. Not only will the existing options promote an increase in greenhouse gas emissions, which will impede Ontario's contributions in meeting net zero emissions by 2050, but it will also erode Ontario's food security, which is becoming a much more crucial issue with climate change. Crop failures are already occurring in countries in the Southern Hemisphere from where we import most of our food, and it is expected to worsen as climate change intensifies. In future, those countries may no longer be able to support agriculture, and we may not be able to look to them to supply our food. Preserving existing farmland should be a climate plan goal, both to stave off increasing greenhouse gas emissions and to preserve our own food security. If nothing else, I don't want to lose the ability to purchase local food. In fact, I would like to see local food levels return to the levels of previous decades. In the past 5 years, I've become an avid cyclist. I've found that cycling is excellent exercise, it keeps me in shape, and it is really good for my mental health. I have a road bike, and when I ride, I like to go long distances and ride at a good speed. Riding these distances and higher speeds is difficult in the city areas. I don't feel safe riding in the city because of the car traffic, and there are a lot of starts and stops which interrupt the flow, speed, and enjoyment of the ride. I joined the Oakville Cycling Club, where we ride through the farmland in Halton Hills, Milton, Caledon, and Brampton. These riding trips are a nice break from the urban environment. They're enjoyable, relaxing, and good for mental health. On these rides, we always stop in one of the smaller towns like Bellefontaine, Erin, or Cheltenham, where we can enjoy the small town ambience for a rest and fuel stop. Last year, the riding season was impacted due to COVID, and the same is happening again this year. Last year, the riding season was only about 1/3 of the regular season. So far this year, all club rides are canceled. I truly miss the rides and the benefits that come with them. If sprawl is allowed to occur, the cyclists are going to have to go further to find the same experience that they have right now in the White Belt and may not even be able to find it at all. As it is, we already see sprawl. It is unavoidable on the rides. When we come upon a new development, it is noticeable and not so pleasant an experience. And I, for one, cannot wait until we ride through the development and back into the urban experience. A few years ago, I remember attending a meeting sponsored by my councillor, Karen Raz, where residents in the Clarkson-Lorne Park area were invited to attend a meeting where neighborhood intensification promoted by the provincial government at the time was discussed, and residents were asked to provide ideas into the planning process. I have to admit that at first I was concerned about the changes it would bring to the neighborhood, but I soon saw the logic in it and came to realize that intensification is the only way to accommodate population growth. I also appreciated the public consultation on the process. I'm dismayed to see that we're going back to post-World War II thinking in terms of planning and not looking at smarter ways to accommodate our growth. We should be building walkable, livable, and more environmentally friendly neighborhoods and preserving our white and green belts. I ask Council to support a more intensified density target within existing boundaries for Peel's land use plan and establishment of a hard urban boundary. Thank you for allowing me to speak today.
Well, thank you, Kathleen. First of all, there is no motion on the floor to pause the MCR process right now. I'm not saying it may not come. It took me 6 hours to get through this. I'm just reading this agenda and doing some background work. So the volume of material that we're getting from staff is a little bit overwhelming. But we are going to continue unless somebody does want to put a motion on the floor. I think it'd be a little bit precipitous. But we are going to continue going through all the reports today and just see how we do. But I thank you very much for your presentation. And I don't see any questions. So can Councillor Starr move receipt of the delegation? Thank you. Any objections? Seeing none. Thank you very much, Kathleen. That was a good presentation.
Thank you.
Now, Rahul Mehta.
Councillor Parrish, he has withdrawn.
Okay. And do we have Sylvia Roberts?
Hello, I'm here. Sorry for submitting the delegation request late. I've gone through several thousand pages of documentation related to this. So my first concern is on this. The population forecasts are wrong. Hempson has continuously been wrong about population in Brampton to a significant degree. In 2019, it approximately reached the 2021 forecasts, despite the forecasts, the Hempson forecast coming out in 2020. They're that far behind the 8 ball. The original draft plan from Hempson for the Greenbelt plan and the growth plan had Brampton reaching 727,000 people in 2031. As of 2020, Statistics Canada estimates the population of Brampton at 700,000. The housing mix for Brampton is also very wrong. The driver of population growth has completely changed in Peel Region, at least in Brampton. It's not people coming here for houses. What's driving the population growth is international students and immigrants, with international students effectively being another stream of immigration. Brampton doesn't need more housing. It doesn't need that. What it needs is things like apartments, dorms, SROs, that kind of stuff. In the past 2 years, for every normal unit that Brampton has added, it hasn't added 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 people per dwelling. It has added 14 people per dwelling. This is absurd. You can have your staff check the numbers. This is the Statistics Canada estimates have Brampton having grown by 49,000 people in the last 2 years, and we've completed less than 3,500 units. The second unit permit numbers are garbage. See, the reality is in Brampton, a ton of these already existed, and the permits are simply normalizing existing housing. So while it's in addition to the legal housing stock, in many cases, we're not actually adding any housing. And this housing is mostly 1 or 2 bedroom units, which is not a substitute for a 4 or a 5 bedroom house. And these houses are not what we need. So the result of this is in the past 5 years, Brampton went from having almost no rooming houses issues to having rooming house issues in basically every single corner of the city. In certain parts of it, the areas have reached the critical threshold where they've effectively turned into a type of a slum where families are leaving the areas because they're surrounded with half of the houses in the neighborhood being full of rooming houses with a dozen or more people in absolutely horrific conditions. Ask the Brampton councillors. I'm sure bylaw can forward you some of the stuff, and I'm sure the Mississauga councillors have seen similar stuff too. So the problem is, because it's being added in housing stock that isn't actually legal, you're not getting the property tax revenues and you're not getting the DCs. It's the allocation of where the housing, even in the built up area, is already an absolute mess. The focus on very high density in a few specific areas, the urban growth centers, results in very expensive housing for smaller units. And the problem is we need a lot of cheaper small units. So what we need to do is look at medium intensification outside of the urban growth centers, but in the built up area. It should be by good transit, but the idea that this has to be higher order transit is absolute nonsense. If you look at Toronto, North Scarborough, north of the 401, has transit ridership in excess of 30%, and it's entirely off buses. Meanwhile, York Region has BRT that runs every 30 minutes. That's a joke. That is not going to pull people out of cars. Most of Brampton actually has very good transit service. So I live in Peel Village. This is basically between Steeles and Queen, and the west side is Main Street, east side is Kennedy. What's happened is you have lots of seniors who live there. They've been there for a while. The houses are becoming in increasingly poor shape and need a ton of work. What's happening is people are buying up those houses and they're packing them full of international students because there's no housing for them. This area has less than half of the population it was built for. There's a significant excess in terms of hard services. Effectively, you could double the amount of people living there, and the region would not need to add any infrastructure because this was built in the 60s and 70s. There wasn't low flow anything. If there was, it was probably labeled communism. With the building standards today, they use dramatically less natural gas and electricity for many of these uses. So there are plenty of places in the region to accommodate this housing. Need in normal permitted housing that actually pays DCs and it pays property tax, and it doesn't require the consumption of vast quantities of land. Thank you. That's my delegation.
Thank you, Sylvia. I don't see any questions again. Can Mayor Thompson please move receipt of the delegation? Thank you. I don't see any objections. Thank you, Sylvia. You seem to take a big interest in our planning committee. In the fall, there's going to be a citizen committee formed. You should watch for the ads. I think it would be right up your alley. Okay, that takes us to the end of delegations, and we're going to be starting on reports. Staff will be doing 5.1.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning, members of the committee. Can you hear me?
Not very well. You have to speak up a little.
Sorry. Is that better?
Yep.
Great. So thank you to everyone here today. My name is Virpal Couture. I'm a principal planner with the Regional Planning and Growth Management team. This morning, I'll be presenting an update on our work plan with Tara Bompancero, Acting Manager of Regional Planning and Growth Management. Next slide, please. This brief presentation will walk through the updated work plan in response to the recent GTA West Council resolution, review the anticipated timelines for Peel 2041 Plus, the Regional Official Plan Review and Municipal Comprehensive Review, and we'll also highlight some of our next steps before we meet again in June. Next slide, please. As you can see here, we are nearing the end of the region's MCR process that has been underway for a number of years now. We've achieved many significant milestones along the way and have been engaging in a comprehensive consultation process, receiving a great deal of feedback from the public, our stakeholders, and agencies. This has led us to be well positioned for a draft MCR ROPA and continued public and stakeholder engagement sessions anticipated later this year. So that means with the current plan, we have about 8 or so months left in our process. Next slide, please. This graphic depicts the various focus areas that make up the Peel 2041 Plus work plan, and one that's quite familiar to Council. As you're aware, ROPA 27 came into effect in 2017, which included the age-friendly planning and health and built environment policies. The remaining focus areas encompass what has been consulted on and will form the MCR ROPA later this year, with the exception of the aggregates policies, which are able to proceed after detailed studies conclude later this fall. Next slide, please. Since the region has been working on our official plan review for some time, we've been fortunate to have been able to hold considerable public consultations prior to the COVID-19 lockdown. This slide highlights some of the more recent consultations, which have been valuable in informing our latest updates. These sessions include a great deal of materials and updates on the entire Peel 2041 process and program that support the long-range planning framework for the region. As a result of the progress we had made in December of 2019, we held in-person consultations in Caledon, Mississauga, and Brampton in March of 2020, and that was on the work to date. This included fulsome updates on the MCR focus areas, including the release of draft policies on the environment-related work. We then held 7 online consultation sessions in September of last year, and the report and consultations at this time also provided an update on all of the various focus areas, including draft policies and directions for the growth management-related work that went to Council in June of last year. We also held sessions on the release of the draft settlement area boundary expansion technical studies, as well as an update on the environment-related work that we had presented previously. We've had great attendance at our consultation sessions through the process. To date, staff have received comments from approximately 700 stakeholders and have approximately 700 contacts on the project notification list. These ongoing consultations have allowed us to receive preliminary feedback prior to any upcoming statutory consultations that may be planned. As an aside, we do plan to provide further updates on the proposed public engagement opportunities at the next meeting of Planning and Growth Management Committee. We understand the importance of raising awareness, educating, and obtaining feedback from the public as we move along the process and into statutory consultation phases. I will pass it on to Tara, who will get into further detail regarding what we can expect in the coming months on the next few slides.
Thank you, Virpal. In March of this year, Regional Council passed a resolution requesting that the province study alternatives for the GTA West Transportation and Transmission Corridor, provided support for a federal EA, and requested that the budget for the GTA West be used to support regionally connected transit, active transportation, and other modes of transportation. In light of this, the consultant team has been staff and the consultant team have been reviewing the Peel 2041 background information to determine potential implications should the GTA West Highway not proceed. Through that review, we've identified 3 of our official plan focus areas that were shown on the wheel that Paul shared a few slides ago, which we will be reviewing to understand the potential implications. First, for settlement area boundary expansion, a further review is being undertaken on the agricultural impact assessment, employment and commercial study, health assessment, transportation, and water and wastewater assessments to determine if the conclusion of those studies would change if the GTA West Highway didn't proceed. The results of this review and the further technical review that was already part of our work plan is being undertaken and are anticipated to result in some revisions to the draft settlement expansion mapping that was previously shared as part of the December 2020 Council meeting. In addition, some strategic revisions are anticipated to the employment strategy, which may result in some shifts in employment lands. Based on initial discussions, however, with our consultants, we don't expect that this work would trigger any significant changes to municipal allocations. From a transportation perspective, the draft policies that were brought to Council in June of 2020 will be slightly revised, and we're examining the historical GTA West policies that have been under appeal. Next slide, please. In order to undertake this review, there's been a minor adjustment to our work plan, and that's resulted in a delay of a few months compared to when we had previously anticipated bringing forward the draft MCR ROPA to Council. We had previously anticipated bringing that draft ROPA to Council in June, seeking authorization to proceed to hold statutory consultation, and now we anticipate bringing that forward in September. This additional few months, however, does provide us with the opportunities to undertake additional public and stakeholder consultation, continue considering implications of Council's direction on the GTA West, undertake the additional necessary detailed technical review, including the fiscal impact assessment, and include them in the draft Municipal Comprehensive Review ROPA, which will include both draft policies and draft mapping. At the June Planning and Growth Management Committee, however, staff do anticipate sharing an updated draft track change official plan that will include some updated draft policies on the region's website. The draft settlement area boundary expansion and draft inclusionary zoning policies are anticipated to be presented at the June meeting, as well as updated growth management and transportation policies. This approach is consistent with our past practice where we have phased the public release of policies as they are available to allow time for public review and comment before they're integrated into the draft ROPA and before statutory consultation. Until the additional technical review is undertaken, the mapping shown as part of the draft consolidation will continue to show the draft settlement area boundary expansion from December 2020, and we will provide updates on the refined boundary to Council as we receive them. We also anticipate sharing the June version of the draft official plan to the province, which would begin a 90-day provincial review as required by the Planning Act. By doing this, it will allow staff to consider provincial feedback prior to issuing notice of the public meeting. Next slide, please. As Verpal mentioned, since the region has been working on our Municipal Comprehensive Review official plan review for some time, we have been fortunate to have been able to hold considerable public consultation, both in person and in the virtual world, on the background technical information as well as on the draft policies. Over the summer, as we proceed into the statutory consultation phase of the project, staff will continue to consider all available opportunities to obtain meaningful public engagement and consultation. We will be providing additional details on this as part of the June report. Next slide, please. Through the presentation provided today, we gave an update on how we anticipate proceeding with the Peel 2041 work plan with Council's resolution from March, while still targeting having a draft ROPA before Council for their consideration for adoption and meeting the provincial conformity deadline. We also provided an update on what information is anticipated to be shared at the June Planning and Growth Management Committee meeting, as well as what we are proposing for the September Planning and Growth Management Committee meeting. This concludes our presentation, and we would welcome any questions or comments. Thank you.
I think you're on mute.
We don't hear you.
Okay, sorry. I do have a couple of questions. I don't mute me. Somebody else does. I have a couple of questions from the delegations. I was hoping staff was paying attention to those delegations. They raised a few interesting points, which I think it would be helpful if we had a staff response to some of the points that they raised. I took some detailed notes if you need them on timelines and consultation with stakeholders and the public. The other thing I would like to see is you've talked about several of these consultations. I know the one in March 2020 in Mississauga was the night of a planning meeting, so no councillors could attend. So I'm wondering if you could give us a tally of who attended all these meetings that you've held, just so we know we're getting a broad amount of participation. One of the delegations mentioned that attending virtually is difficult for a lot of people. Some of them don't even know how to turn on a computer. So I think it's important that, I think one of the figures you gave was 700 people, stakeholders. We've got 1.5 million people in the region. So I don't think we're reaching enough people. But if you could have kept a tally of all those meetings and give us those numbers in a chart for the next meeting, I think it would go a long way in answering some of the concerns of the delegations. I also have had our staff suggest that in this timeline and what's been accomplished, there isn't a lot of reference to major transportation station areas, and they are very anxious to have that speeded up. So if you could comment on why those aren't in here or they're not referred to, I'd appreciate it. Tara or Verpal?
I'm happy to take a crack at it. So really the purpose of the overview presentation today was just to sort of highlight the couple of months delay that we would be needing to bring forward the draft ROPA. We are proceeding with the major transit station area work, and it has been circulated to the province. So sort of similar to how I'd mentioned in the presentation, the 90-day review for the overall. That 90-day review is underway with the province currently on the draft MTSA policies and mapping. So that's in process. That's anticipated to conclude that 90-day review in early June. So previously there had been discussion on whether we wanted to proceed with the MTSA separately or as part of the overall municipal comprehensive review. And I think just because we're sort of down to the last 8 months or so, it may not be possible to proceed with MTSA separately, but we do expect to get some meaningful comments from the province that will allow us to make any changes. And that was important because this would be the first MTSA ROPA that the province would have seen. So we wanted to make sure that we got it to them early to enable us to make those changes and sort of proceed with that as part of the overall process. And I also note that on the agenda later is inclusionary zoning, which does rely on that major transit station area ROPA, and the importance of us completing that work, which we'll be talking about in the next couple of items on the agenda.
And I'm before I recognize Mayor Thompson, were you able to take some notes and address some of those questions for us in our next meeting from the delegations, please?
I can take that one too. Yeah, I took detailed notes, and I'm sure other staff did too. So we'd be happy to provide some responses to those comments. And I think some of that will also probably come up as part of the presentation on land needs assessment that's coming up, I think, right after this one.
Okay, thank you. And Mayor Thompson?
I think Councillor Dasco is ahead of me. If he wants to go first, I'm good with that, and then I'll follow.
Oh, supposed to be having questions from the committee first, I was reminded, and then we go to some of the hangers-on.
Okay.
Our welcome people, of course, especially Councillor Dasco.
All right. Thank you. So first of all, to follow up on that, I think if I can just lean in, I think it's important that we have the TSA and the inclusionary zoning needs to be part of this official plan. It's a must, because what's the point in having it if we don't have it in there? So I'm just saying, I know you got tight timelines, Tara, but I think that's a priority that we need to push hard on. Secondly, going back to the G2S corridor, I know where the region's position or council's position is on it. Have we, when you're looking at those studies on other modes and what that's going to look like, have you looked at if the province doesn't build that we keep that corridor for future like rapid transit or anything like that, because it does connect a lot of communities to make things work, and especially if we're moving people around. Is that being considered in your study? And if not, why? Not.
And through Madam Chair, it's Adrian here. Maybe I can answer that one. Absolutely. There's a couple of things to that. First of all, in Council's actual resolutions that they passed around the GTA West, there was language in there really encouraging the province in that case to in lieu of planning for and pursuing a highway, to look at alternative modes, including transit, active transportation, and all that. So that was right in the motion. And in looking at the official plan, and we're obviously taking it back and building it into the studies, but part of that is the transportation study and what we might want to be doing in terms of protecting corridors, meeting our obligations actually under the provincial policy statement and the growth plan to protect planned corridors, and how transit fits into all of that. So absolutely, it's part of it.
Well, while I got you, Adrian,
sure.
We've been at this since 2013. We've had tons of public meetings with a lot of input on this official plan and getting where we were. The reason why it was extended was to take the 2041 and now 51 numbers and get that all rolled ahead. We're really down to our backs are to the wall, and I know other municipalities aren't as advanced as we are in our official plan, but I think when you do come back, there has been a lot of consultation, not just last year, but up to last year as well. So I think a lot of people have put a lot of time and input, and I know when Caledon has it, we have a really good turnout every time we do something. So I don't want those people to feel, well, what the heck am I going up if we're not going to make a decision on something? So I see it from both ends, but I think where we're caught in understanding, I think if you can do a better justification, and maybe it needs to come to council just with an oral presentation is, here's where we've been, here's how we got here, and here's where we're at and where we're going to get to. And I think that would help because we're getting a lot of deputations, and rightly so. From their lens, that's what they see. And I think we've done a poor job really telling our story on that. So thank you.
Yeah, and I would just respond by saying certainly appreciate the delegations coming forward today and raising a whole series of really important issues that are matters for discussion as part of our review. Many of the things that that we've been wrestling with in our work, and certainly there are definitely uncertainties and things that we're responding to. Happy to, when we report back next time, make sure we cover some of that. You'll hear some of it in the presentations later today, but definitely there's important things there, and we have been at this for a long time. And I would say, that part of that is. Is the engagement that we've had, the technical work that we've had, but also the detailed work that we've been doing alongside and sort of building on the work that our local municipalities have been doing. I think one of the delegations mentioned, the potential for municipalities to take sort of an algorithmic or mathematical approach to planning for growth, and there's certainly sort of elements of that in all municipalities, but we have been really drilling down, and I think it's over 1,000 small geographic units that we've been looking at since 2017, trying to get a handle on what is there today, what is the potential for growth, what is the potential to lean in and really deliver on doing things differently and more intensive. And of the 700,000 people that we're expecting in the planning horizon, it's well over 500,000 that we're thinking can be accommodated in existing planned areas. And there's lots that goes into that, and lots of uncertainty for sure, but something that the region is really I guess serious about, and serious about exceeding provincial minimum targets for sure.
Well, it's like even with Callan, I'll use an example. 55% of our growth is all going to be intensified before we do any greenfield development with the 2051, right? So there you go. Thank you.
Thank you to the questioner. Can we have Councillor Dasco step forward?
Thank you, through the chair. And I appreciate protocol, but hardly I would consider myself a hangers-on. What I would like to say, and I won't even go there. So what I would like to say is, I find the presentation, it's a well done presentation. It's a troubling presentation at the same time. I do find this process being rushed. And I know that there are some timelines, et cetera. But what I would like to know is, what has the exact consultation strategy been? Because I will tell you, I think the chair mentioned it. For example, one of the growth consultations that was held was on the same night as a planning and development meeting in the city of Mississauga, and I lobbied to get one for Southern Mississauga. Again, getting that word out, that was essentially my office that was doing that. And I'm just wondering, what are we doing? This is such a massive, it has such massive implications. What exactly are we doing? And this is my fear, is all of this is happening during the pandemic, and our mechanisms are virtual, but also what resources have been put here in terms of actually getting some real consultation. And this isn't just tokenism in terms of saying, check the box. Oh, we've got this date, this date, this date. But what are the metrics that are out there? And what is, if we're going through all of this, I think all of us as councillors need to go back to our residents and say, this is what's happening here. This is the consultation that we've had with our residents. This is what we've done to make sure that you're in the know and plugged in. So if you could please elaborate a little bit more in terms of how the word's getting out there, the real consultation strategy, and what those metrics are. Thank you.
Adrian?
Yeah, and maybe the staff want to fill in with some of the details. But as we said, we've been at this for a while. I mean, since 2015, 2019, up until the pandemic, we had many kind of show ups at pop-up events, at farmers markets and what have you. We did hold open houses in all the municipalities in 2018. We've had the open houses last year. We've had the more formalized statutory, or I guess virtual open houses. In addition, we've had a fairly extensive campaign in terms of media, putting the word out in the newspapers, on Twitter and Facebook. We also bought some time on some of the digital display boards in Mississauga and Brampton, things like that. So I don't know if Verpal, you want to add to that. And we have also published consultation reports where we've outlined what was presented at each meeting and the feedback that we've got, and how we're responding to that on our website. I think we shared some of that in our report to council in December last year. So we're doing that. We've also got a mailing list of, I think it's over 700 folks that we keep regularly updated. So, Paul, do you want to add to that? Have I missed anything?
Yeah.
No,
sure.
if I could,
Sorry.
Excuse me, as the chair, just for a second, I have a question of Adrian. Were all these consultations from 2015 to 2019 in anticipation of a 2041 target? Or were we always suspecting it was going to be 2051?
So the majority earlier on was focused on the 2041. When we got into sort of, I guess, the beginning of last year, the province started to signal that they were evaluating the targets and that they may be publishing a 2051 number. And at that time, there was also some preliminary forecast information from the Provincial Ministry of Finance. So it was around that time that we started to signal the 2051. Prior to that, it was around the 2041 numbers. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry I interrupted. Verpal, do you have a comment?
No, sorry, I just had a follow-up question. My apologies. And that was, I just wanted to clarify. Did you say that the mailing list for the entire region is 700 people?
I think that's
the plan review.
For the official plan review, yes, it's about 700.
Wow. Okay, thank you.
I'd like a subsequent question. Of that 700, how many are developers?
Yeah, I'm not sure off the top. Some we would know, some we wouldn't. There'd be a significant portion.
Well, yes, I have asked right at the beginning of this little presentation if we could get some data on the number of meetings, the number of attendees, and maybe a little bit more detail on who are developers, who are lobbyists, and who are regular garden variety folks.
Yeah, and I would say that's one of the reasons why we decided to extend our consultation beyond sort of the more traditional planning forums and invites to meetings, and attend community events and the festivals and what have you, and get out there in the real world with the real public and get some feedback that way. Of course, difficult to do now with COVID.
I was going to say that, and I see Councillor Innes has a question. Are you finished, Councillor Dasco? For now? Okay. Councillor Innes?
Thanks. It was just more about the circulation. That is a small number for a mailing list, but I know that I've put it in my own newsletter, and I'm wondering how many other councillors have put it into their newsletter that is mailed to every single home in their, so I've done that. So I think, yes, that's not a great list that the region has, but in reality, those are the residents or businesses that have reached out. So in fairness to staff, you're working on a list of engagement. I would be interested to know, when you come back with that information, how many of the councillors like myself, who have at least once, if not multiple times, put the information in regards to our official plan review and how to get involved and why it's important that they do it. And then would also encourage that that councillors who are doing one for the, I guess, the fall now, would include that information in there as well. That's it, Chairperson.
Thank you, Councillor Innes. I'm also wondering at Mississauga, and the first delegation was a bit interesting. Several of them talked about different forms of housing and concentration of housing. And we had a report come to our council last planning meeting that got permission from council to look into all these different forms of intensification that are more genteel in single family house neighborhoods and so forth. I'm going to ask our guys to send it forward. They're just asking to go into it. They haven't completed it, but it might be interesting to look at rather than just crashing all these numbers into individual units, that if we could look more at intensification in a gentle fashion. Even the lady from Lauren Park seems to have come around to that way of thinking. I also am wondering, I haven't had an opportunity to look at the Hamilton and Halton reasons for slowing down their MCR process. It would be interesting to find out from their staff why that was done. If you could do that for us, I'd appreciate that as well. Okay, if there are no more questions on this report, except for we fired a pile of things that we want to see from you.
May I ask a question?
Yes, I'm sorry, Councillor Sinclair, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I question through you to staff regarding aggregate resources.
Ian, I think you should turn your photo off because you're bubbling. You have to start again, Ian.
Okay, just the aggregate resources policy paper. I understand that process has barely begun. I think a consulting team has been hired, and I thought I had the impression from Caledon staff it might be completed sometime in 2022 early. I don't know. Could we get some comments on that?
Adrian?
Sorry,
yeah, so
Chair. Sorry, go ahead, Adrian.
Through Madam Chair. So yes, definitely, you know, the aggregates resource component of our review is one of the later pieces to start, and it is very much underway now, and the consultant is been retained, and we're hoping that we're going to be able to incorporate at a regional level the regional policy framework into the municipal comprehensive review at this time. But the work has to be done and the engagement has to happen. And certainly we had the delegation today who raised a number of really important issues that, you know, we're looking at addressing through that review, including, you know, looking at cumulative impacts and making sure our policy framework is robust in dealing with those things. And, you know, we're anxious to get on with working through that. I don't know if for Paul, you have anything more specific on the timeline of that? But
I would just add that it is able to proceed slightly after a full, like the MCR ROPA. So Councillor Sinclair, I think you're right in saying, you know, might be completed in early 2022, but the policy work should be able to, be brought to council later this year.
Okay, the strip mining issue is somewhat of a deal in Ward 4, Caledon, but a very big deal in Ward 1, my ward, that absolute devastation going on for miles. So we'll have to deal with this. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Sinclair. Are there any further questions from anyone? Okay, Councillor Carlson, would you move receipt of the report, please? Any objections? Thank you. We're going on now to 5.2.
Can you hear me?
Yes, can.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So good morning, members of the Planning and Growth Management Committee. My name is Duran Wedderburn, and I'm a principal planner with the Regional Planning and Growth Management Division at the region. I'm here today to deliver the presentation of the region's draft land needs assessment methodology and intensification analysis in support of the PL 2041 plus official plan review. Joining me today to assist with the presentation is Paul Kulig from Perkins & Will Consulting, who was retained to assess the region's intensification work to meet the conformity requirements of the growth plan. I also have Sean Hertel from Sean Hertel and Associates Urban Planning, Craig Ferguson from Urban Metrics, and Russell Matthew from Hempson Consulting joining us today as well in support of answering any technical questions. The intent of the presentation is to provide an overview of the key inputs to the land needs assessment methodology and how they are reflected on the ground in the Peel context. Next slide. The growth plan states that the minister will issue a standard methodology to be used by municipalities to assess the land needed to implement the growth plan and accommodate forecasted growth to the horizon of the plan. This work is a fundamental component of municipal comprehensive reviews and is a new requirement established in the updated growth plan. In August of 2020, the provincial government released an updated land needs assessment methodology that supported a simplified format and a new market-based considerations for the methodology. Next slide. The LNA consists of a stepped approach to calculating land needs. Some key considerations are the total amount of growth forecasted to be accommodated, the type of housing and employment growth that will be required, where in a municipality this type of growth can be accommodated based on policy, achieving minimum density and intensification targets, and market demand. Next slide. For the next portion of the presentation, we'll take you through some of the preliminary findings from the region's draft land needs assessment as they relate primarily to residential and commercial areas. Next slide. To achieve the growth forecasted to 2051, the region is planning to accommodate an additional 700,000 people over the next 30 years. The additional growth must be allocated to lower tier municipalities to support the regional total. As a part of the LNA, analysis is undertaken to determine how much and what type of housing units are required to accommodate this new population. Next slide. To accommodate the forecasted population, we estimate that approximately 270,000 new units are required. The new units are applied to each respective municipality based on the type of units that can be accommodated, which we'll touch upon shortly. And trends in average household size, or PPU, is also a factor in determining the number of households required. Next slide. So, this is an interesting chart. Over the past 20 years, single and semi-detached homes have represented a significant share of new housing units in Peel. Through our current LNA work, we are now forecasting a shift to more compact, transit-oriented built forms to accommodate a significant share of Peel's growth in urban areas and newer Greenfield communities. In our analysis, between 2021 and 2051, approximately 70% of the new units will be in apartment and townhome built forms. Some of the key drivers in this analysis is the availability of land supply in Peel, encouraging more compact built forms, and supporting policy directions for community resilience and reduced greenhouse gas emissions. Next slide. The next two slides are a little technical, but for the LNA, it is important to acknowledge demographics and how they are considered in this work. One of the key market-based inputs is the consideration of housing preference, which is measured based on age cohorts and primary home maintainer data from Stats Canada. This information provides insights into the age cohorts in Peel that are forecasted to grow the fastest and makes the connection to the type of homes that they typically occupy. Next slide. In the Peel context, the largest segment of forecasted household growth are families with children who typically prefer more ground-oriented units. The market-based analysis yields a greater demand for singles and semis and more tempered growth for apartments. But we know that this is not a market-based exercise solely. Consideration in our work through working with the local municipalities on their land supply data considers local land supply and the availability of land, strategic interests such as climate change and sustainable development, leveraging transit investment to support transit-oriented development, and policy directions in the growth plan to limit sprawl and encourage compact built forms through minimum rates of intensification and density targets. We are projecting to balance the market demand, demographic trends, and policy directions, which will mean a significant shift to infill and apartment built forms to accommodate an increased proportion of growth compared to historical trends in Peel. Next slide. A check-in on how we're doing. This is an excerpt from the Growth Management Program report, which is on the agenda today. In 2019 and 2020, the region is exceeding historic and forecasted levels of growth. A significant share is driven by apartment units, and singles and semis are declining, which could be attributed to the availability of land supply, or the availability of units in planned communities such as Heritage Heights, which we know is undertaking the planning process and will be available at a later date. But we also note that many of the new units identified are legal secondary units, which is something to watch as an emerging trend. And noting one of the delegates earlier did mention that, and that's something that we are aware of and are monitoring and looking into with our local counterparts. Next slide. Now we'd like to shift the discussion to where in the region we are directing growth to add a little geographical context to some of the numbers that we've just discussed. As an overview, the existing policy areas in Peel are the built-up area, which is in the pink, the urban growth centers, which are in the purple, and designated greenfield areas, which are orange. These are areas which are primarily identified for accommodating the majority of growth. We also have rural settlements brown and obviously the Greenbelt Plan areas, which there are little to no development permissions, so these areas are generally protected. The light yellow area is commonly referred to as the White Belt and includes rural and agricultural lands. These areas can potentially accommodate expansion if a demonstrated need is shown through a land needs assessment. So, next slide. The built-up area consists of existing communities developed over many decades with a mix of homes, jobs, amenities, and existing servicing and infrastructure in place. They include community neighborhoods, nodes, and town centers that support a mix of uses and a range of development densities. The built-up area is also to be utilized to measure the minimum intensification rate and support the intensification first policies within the growth plan. Next slide. Urban growth centers are the focal point for growth within the built-up area and should generally accommodate the highest densities. Some of the highest densities in Peel are forecasted to be accommodated within Brampton and Mississauga's urban growth centers. The movement of people within these areas are supported by planned higher order transit, such as the Hare Ontario LRT, Kitchener GO Line, Queen Street BRT, Milton GO Line, and the 403 BRT, just to name a few. Next slide. Designated greenfield areas are planned new communities that typically accommodate a higher proportion of ground-oriented units, with some mixed-use development in newer greenfield areas. Minimum density targets expressed as residents and jobs per hectare are applicable to these areas. Across Peel, these areas are planned to achieve densities that are above some of the community areas in the existing built-up area and well above the provincial minimum of 50 residents and jobs per hectare. I provided an overview of how the technical inputs of the LNA are applied to the existing policy areas in Peel. At this stage, I'd like to introduce Paul Kulik from Perks and Will, who will talk about some of the intensification analysis work his team is currently undertaking. Next slide.
Great. Thank you, Duran. Can you hear me, everybody? Yep. All right. So my name is Paul Kulig, and we completed the intensification analysis work illustrated here together with our colleagues Sean Hurdle and Craig Ferguson from Urban Metrics, both of which are on the call today and are available to answer questions if needed. We completed the work in support of the MCR work that Duran just described us, and are also currently in the process of updating the analysis or the memo shown here with the 2051 horizon, and so that'll be shared with staff soon. It's worth noting that we were also on the team that completed some of the region's work in support of the major transit station area work, and those have been integrated into the work. The memo illustrated here included a historic analysis survey of the intensification patterns within Peel, a review of the strategic growth areas and the major transit station corridors, a strategic market demand assessment that looks at the mix and location for new housing, as well as a series of observations and recommendations to move forward. Next slide, please. The work included analysis that was based on the building permit activity that Duran highlighted briefly. In that work, we looked at the location, timing, and the typology, or the type of buildings that we are seeing building activity in. What we are seeing, or some of the trends that emerged, is that in Mississauga, we're seeing a lot of work or intensification around community nodes like Clarkson, Port Credit, Uptown, Erin Mills, and then in Brampton, a series of emerging intensification nodes around places like Trinity Commons, Mississauga Road, and Steeles. And then it's important to note that whilst the targets looked at a 44% intensification rate, we are currently updating that work to look up as far as the 2020 numbers. Next slide, please. Just wanted to mention here that the image and the graphic on the right has been modified from, I believe, the version that was shared yesterday through the clerk's office, and we will be working with staff to get the updated image to you as for your records. And just to sort of summarize briefly, the high-level strategic market demand assessment that we looked at is based on a broad housing, demographic, and economic trends, and was used to identify the opportunities and constraints towards achieving the forecasted rates of intensification. It also looked at the mix of housing types that were identified in the region's draft growth allocation strategy for the SGAs. To achieve these intensification targets, each municipality is expected to accommodate a larger share of household growth in apartment units compared to what we've seen up till now and the existing stock. SGAs, or strategic growth areas, will play an important role in accommodating intensification and achieving this future mix, as the majority of household growth within the SGAs is expected to be accommodated in apartment types, and to a smaller extent, townhouse units as well. There are a number of demographic, economic, and housing factors that are likely to influence the rate of intensification in SGAs and household growth in apartment units. In this analysis, we considered the potential impact of things like demographic trends, the supply of land, market characteristics, as well as economic factors in order to assess the opportunities and constraints that these have on achieving the intensification targets outlined, as well as the mix outlined for each of the SGAs. Next slide, please. And so just to sort of summarize, I think in some of the prioritization work that was completed, urban growth centers will remain the sort of primary focus for future growth and intensification. There will be phased development along a hierarchy of key transit corridors. These are illustrated in the colored lines on the image on the right. GO stations are illustrated on the right in the green circles, and these will see a varying mix of intensification based on their readiness, including infrastructure capacity, as well as the transit service provided and land availability. And then together, what we're seeing is a new intensification hierarchy that allows the region to build upon its decision-making processes, and looking at things like the appropriate intensification targets, how those match with the market demand and the opportunities and constraints identified, and then as well as which SGAs the region should be focusing on for 2041, and then the prioritization and allocation that may or may not need to be shifted within that framework. So with that, I'll pass things back to Duran.
Thank you very much, Paul. So building on the intensification analysis, existing and emerging strategic growth areas, such as major transportation areas and major transportation areas, are important to supporting compact, mixed-use, and resilient communities in Peel. These areas can leverage planned transit investment to create new communities for residents to live, work, and play, and further enhance existing communities with new investments and a mix of uses. Oh, next slide. The image before you illustrates the change in densities forecasted between 2021 and 2051 and highlights key areas where growth will be directed. The outcomes of our work support compact and transit-oriented forms of development within key strategic areas and newer emerging communities to accommodate the forecasted growth. The location of these key areas are consistent with the local planning work and future visioning work that are being undertaken by the local municipalities. And on the slide, you can see some of the key areas identified that correspond to some of the areas that we anticipate densities increasing in a transit supportive manner. Next slide. So a couple site-specific examples include Bramalea City Center and the Uptown Brampton/Shoppers World in Brampton, and in Mississauga, downtown Cooksville and the Lakeview Waterfront Node. There is sufficient potential across the numerous strategic growth areas in Peel. However, not all areas will develop immediately. As Paul mentioned, the timing of infrastructure delivery and market demand will play an important role in how these areas are going to accommodate growth in the future and the associated timing. Next slide. So to kind of sum up the residential component or the residential piece of the analysis, to meet our forecasted growth, Peel will need to support the development of compact, mixed-use, and transit-supportive communities. Our analysis in the LNA indicates that a significant share of new growth will be accommodated through intensification, and a greater proportion of new units will be through higher density forms. While a significant share of new growth will be directed to the existing areas, there will also need to be settlement area boundary expansion to accommodate additional people. This analysis balances the need to accommodate market demand with supporting more compact and transit-oriented development, and addresses broader regional values and goals such as climate change and sustainable development. Next slide. So the following section will quickly cover the employment lands required to support the existing and future businesses in Peel. Next slide. So at a high level, the region is planning to accommodate an additional 334,000 jobs over the next 30 years. And by 2051, the region is forecasted to accommodate 1.1 million jobs. Employment areas, next slide. Employment areas are lands identified for protection to accommodate existing and future jobs in the region. To support forecasted growth, we're planning to protect existing employment areas and intensify the areas to accommodate more jobs given the type and scale of development to be accommodated. In addition to employment areas, jobs are also accommodated in strategic growth areas such as urban growth centers and major transit station areas, which typically take the form of major office developments. Next slide. On the right of the screen, the 2021 total employment mix is shown, as well as the total employment mix forecasted for 2051. Both population-related employment and major office employment will take an increased share of jobs in Peel, driven by intensification and the changing nature of work in the region. On the left, you can see the forecast employment mix again, with the share of new PRE and major office employment increasing to 2051. Next slide. If we examine some of the recent trends, again with an excerpt taken from the Growth Management Strategy Program report that's on the agenda, we see that the region is underperforming when it comes to long-term employment forecasts. The region has completed an employment strategy in 2017 that identified measures to be implemented to support the achievement of forecasted employment growth. And the recently approved Major Office Incentive Program is one of the recommendations that have been implemented to support employment growth. To the year 2020 on the graph, you can see that we've done exceptionally well, and this was driven by industry and warehousing as the major push. And this, again, may be attributed to some of the impacts of COVID and the demand for just-in-time delivery and logistics and warehousing kind of taking an important role, during this period in time. Next slide. So another important consideration is employment conversions. The region has received approximately 38 requests for employment land conversions, which total 370 hectares within the proposed regional employment area. These requests are based on submissions through local municipal studies and private requests from property owners and consultants working on their behalf. We're currently working with the local municipalities to evaluate the merits of the requests in the context of provincial and regional policies and consideration to ensuring sufficient employment land is available across the range and mix of employment required to meet the employment forecast. Lands that are removed from the regional employment area will still require a local official amendment to determine the appropriate land use. Next slide. So kind of in summary, within employment areas, we are forecasting an additional need of 1,200 hectares to accommodate an additional 35,000 jobs on new employment lands. These lands will typically take on the form of manufacturing industrial jobs with some major office components to support corporate head office that may want to consolidate. Staff continue to review this assessment based on some of the most recent information received and a consideration for the impacts of regional council position on the GTA West corridor and some of the work that Tara mentioned in the previous presentation. Key findings. Next slide. To accommodate growth to the 2051 horizon, a significant share of growth will need to be accommodated within the existing build-up area. The region will experience a shift to more dense built forms supported by strategic growth areas. Notwithstanding the shift to higher density units and forms of employment, settlement area boundary expansion will still be required to accommodate some of the forecasted growth in a manner that addresses the demand for ground-oriented units and land-intensive employment uses to provide choice to current and future residents and businesses in Peel. Next slide. We continue to work with the local municipalities and stakeholders to prepare an updated land use assessment report and continue to make minor refinements to the forecast based on the input from this committee and others. We anticipate an updated draft report will be prepared for the June committee with these further considerations. Thank you very much for your time, and we're happy to take any questions. Next slide.
I see a question from Councillor Sinclair.
Yes, Madam Chair. On slide 22, it deals with the notion of 3,000 hectares for a new community area land need. And I think it would be useful to find out what that really means. And I think it would be useful to get a explanatory memo from staff. So is that 3,000 hectares gross hectares? Or is it net buildable where population will be located? And it makes a big difference because, of course, if you're doing Greenfield, you'll end up with EPA lands, roads, parks, and institutional uses, for example. So I don't really understand if we're looking at 3,000 hectares for population only, and the next interesting question is, does this include the employment land areas necessary? So could we get a sort of a blow up of what that all means sometime in the near future? That's my request. Thank you.
Through you, Madam Chair, I can take a stab at the response. So the 3,000 hectares includes population and community-based jobs. So the institutional, service-related, education. So that's all rolled into that land need in terms of developable. And the total required for employment area employment that's shown later in the presentation, the 1,200 hectares is for the employment land component, which is more so the industry-based jobs with some major office as well.
Thank you. Is that good?
Well, I'm trying to bring that into perspective in my own mind. 3,000 hectares basically gets us to about 74 100-acre farms. And I don't know, I didn't quite catch the EPA part, but because of the Greenbelt Plan policies, if there's a stream or valley system, you take that out and then you do a setback from top of bank, and then it's 120 meters beyond that for the Greenbelt policies to be left and revegetated in forest. So it's, I don't know if we're looking at 74 100-acre farms or over 100. So just trying to get a grasp on the magnitude of the surface area that's being developed. Thank you.
And just quickly through you, Madam Chair, one way to visualize that is that these numbers do line up with the settlement boundary expansion kind of mapping, draft mapping that you would have seen published previously. So it's consistent with that mapping.
Are you happy with that answer, Councillor Sinclair?
Well, I guess I now have to get a calculation of what that mapping covers, so we'll work on that in the future. Thank you.
Okay, staff will bring that back to us. Councillor Thompson or Mayor Thompson?
Councillor's fine. I am at the region.
Okay.
Getting to it, so I'm going to get back to it. I think it's slide 19, whatever. It's basically on your growth areas, major transit station. And what I'm asking on that is, okay, that's a good step, but that really doesn't tell the public or council really in general what we're really talking about here. So I would like to ask if we can add on to that. And the reason being, especially for Caledon, what passes through is GO. You know, we got the GO line that comes down Highway 10. We got the GO line that comes down Highway 50. So we need to figure out how to do that. Secondly, when we're talking about major population centers with transit, we need to look at that for employment. You did hear one speaker say that she works with Microsoft, and basically, you know, they pulled out of Mississauga because of transit. Transit is going to be what we're talking about here. We need a second layer on this map to show how the major transit feeds into the employment sectors as well as the residential sectors, because people need to get to work. And if we're really serious about what we're talking about here, we need to look at, you got your transit hubs, but maybe that might tell you that you might need another transit hub in an employment center. That's our biggest problem even now with Mississauga and Brampton right now with the Southampton, you know, the employment land's not getting picked up is because you haven't got a major road to get trucks in and out. But also, how do you get people in? So I'm going to say you're not going to get that in the next day or so. I get that. But I think going forward, if we could just add, I think this is really good, but I would like to do a layer of GO, what that looks like. Other arterials, the Brampton Transit, Mississauga Transit, whatever we all have. But on top of that, with the demand, if we want to get the workforces that we're looking forward, we need that ability to know how that transit's going to work into those new areas as well. So let's get creative and figure out what that looks like so we can build it from the beginning. So the development industry not knows, well, is it a rail spur or is it a major truck route, but have we got a transit route as well? And is that something that we could look at going forward, please?
Through you, Madam Chair, we can work with our colleagues in transportation planning to get the rapid transit corridors on shown on this map to show that linkage between the density land use mapping with the transit connections. So we can definitely pull that together.
That'd be awesome, and especially going forward in Caledon, it's open. But the thing is if we can build those transit corridors as we do the employment as well as the residential, as you know, in Mayfield West, we got the developers even for, you know, giving us $65 million towards a new transit hub, right? So we need to look at those things as well, but we also need to look at the employment centers. And I think it was Miss Wilson that had brought that question up. But I think that's just something that we you know, if we're going to get it, let's make sure we get it right. I think this is good. I'm just saying, you know, if we can just, you know, how you just layer on the maps, I'm just wondering if we can just do that with just transit and moving people, you know, and what that looks like. And if it's even walkable, I don't know how we do that, but I'm just saying, I think we just have to start thinking how we plan different, because I think you've definitely heard that from the questions we're getting from the public coming forward as well. I really think we need to explain ourselves better, but it's a good start. I'm just asking if we can just add that going forward. Thank you.
We can take that back for sure. Thank you.
Are there any other questioners? I have a limited screen, so I can't see all kinds of hands up.
There's Councillor Dasco and then Councillor Vicente.
Okay, Councillor Dasco and then Vicente.
All right, thank you through the chair. I didn't know actually, sorry, is Councillor Vicente a member of growth management? So I think he should go ahead then.
Okay, I thought you took offense last time, so
No.
Okay, Paul, you go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Councillor Dasco, you're always welcome to go ahead. No issue from here. Just to add, I guess to ask a question, when we talk about intensification and intensification areas, considering also the delegation from earlier where we talked about how you don't necessarily need to have high order transit to encourage growth or to encourage use of transit in areas that have more development and persons living there. What are we going to be saying about infill opportunities that may arise from time to time in areas that do not fall within the intensification corridors that you're identifying here?
Yeah, I can definitely answer that. So through you, Madam Chair. So with respect to the strategic growth areas and higher order transit comment, so when we are developing our strategic growth areas, we do work with the local municipalities to identify the key areas in the official plan. So in the Brampton context, we have been working with staff to ensure we capture the areas identified in the Brampton 2040 vision.
Yeah.
And some of those are just town centers, and some of them do have a kind of a higher order transit component. So we do want to make sure we identify those areas and protect for the higher density uses. With respect to general intensification outside of strategic growth areas, policy direction from the growth plan and in most official plans is to encourage intensification throughout the entire built-up area. So on the mapping, I showed previously that entire pink area. I think there's a caveat that intensification should be encouraged, and through the local official plan policies, you can kind of shape, what the requirements are for, compatibility and the different considerations if those one-off intensification projects do pop up outside of some of those strategic growth areas. But in those considerations, obviously, we just need to manage the scale of what's being proposed to ensure that, the right connections, servicing, and amenities are there to be commensurate with the level of intensification that's proposed in an application. So to kind of sum it, we encourage and support intensification and look to the local official plan policies to kind of guide how that's implemented into the existing community areas.
So then if I take the corollary of what you have just stated and you're encouraging intensification in those certain areas, that doesn't necessarily mean that from the regional point of view that we are discouraging intensification where opportunities may come up. Is that what I heard?
Yes, that's correct. We are not discouraging intensification opportunities where they come up and can be evaluated based on their appropriateness.
Very good. Okay, thank you. Because I think there's always like a very heated debate and conversation that ensues when, a developer or a land investor, or whomever they may be, acquire, a number of different properties. They amalgamate them into one. The area is low density, but it is served by transit. And so you always get into a kind of discussion, usually surrounding a lot of NIMBYism, that the area can't support that type of growth. But, we know from other cities and other jurisdictions in this country and around the world where it does work and it can be supported. And so I just want to make sure that in everything that we do, while we are directing our efforts for intensification to these areas that have been identified, we do not exclude the opportunity for it to happen elsewhere, particularly where transit is present and can begin to handle and take pressure off of, if you're putting all the growth just in one spot, that's fine, but there may be great opportunities elsewhere. And I think that we should be encouraging that also. Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Dasco.
Well, thank you through the chair. I just wanted to say, listening to this presentation, it's, again, I've just got probably more concerns and questions than I have anything else. Ward 1 went from being a industrial sleepy hollow to all of a sudden just a real going concern, and still is. Lakeshore Connecting Communities was in place. It's not new. The funding for the BRT component, which isn't the whole path of Lakeshore, it's just one swath from East Avenue out to the Toronto border, is one. So the only thing new there is the funding. And what I'm cautious with, and seeing some of these slides here, and looking at some of the areas, it's for example, we've got a major node being Lakeview, and we started off the whole Lakeview process in draft concept before the lands were changed at 5,600 units down on the old OPG lands. It is now at 8,050. We've got Rangeview, which is yet to hit the books, and that's going to be somewhere around 3,000 units. And why I mention this is because that also goes into Port Credit proper, for example, where we've actually hit our minimum threshold of PPJ already. And by the way, we're seeing a lot more coming. And then I also look towards the west at the old Texaco lands. We're at just shy of 3,000 units. That's excluding all of the other infill, et cetera, that is happening through the ward. And so when I look at this, it's almost like you're indicating that this is still a hidden gem that people are looking at, and this is really concerning because we also have gone through a lot of time, effort, and energy to put in our official plan, our local area plan, and did real consultation with our communities and with planning staff, et cetera. And so when I look at this, I look around Peel and say, again, I come right back to the consultation component, and also to see that I don't want that we're rushing things for the sake of just ticking a box, because for example, we went in Lakeview from being a mid-rise community, low and mid-rise community, and now it's popping to the mid to high. And I'm seeing more and more of that coming along the Lakeshore corridor, and they're pointing towards, the MTSA, quite frankly, even though some of them are 2 kilometers away from an MTSA, for example. But that seems to fit the narrative, and this type of stuff. Or, they'll point out a GO train station in Port Credit, which is already a very, very fulsome spot to be, and acting like there's nothing there. So I guess part of my of what I'm mentioning here is I really, really feel that it is so important to have real and open conversation, and also to listen to what the municipal planning staff has to say as well, because I know that the growth numbers are one thing, and then there's the rest of it fits into this is where region, city, or municipality differ at times. But what else I'm looking at here too is how much of the focus also is being put onto making complete communities. Like, if we're looking to take that next step, let's take the real next step and pair, the amenities, the employment, the residential altogether, as opposed to what I'm seeing through all of this is just, again, trying to shoehorn some areas in. And this is where I get concerned, because in the south, we have Lake Ontario as being our real border, and we can't do anything about that. It's not a green belt, a white belt, or whatever. I mean, it's you're at the waterfront, and then we also have our railway tracks, which is an issue, and also the QEW. So I just wanted to see, I guess, in part of all of that is again, I come back to consultation, and what kind of consultation can we truly have with all of this? And 2, where else I'm going with this is have all of these different factors been put in. And I mentioned, of course, to the south with Ward 1, just because, it was indicated in this presentation. But I look at some of the other areas too. Councillor Vincente was mentioning we've got other areas around, certainly Mississauga and Caledon, Bolton, etc. And I just wanted to make sure that we are checking all the boxes as we're going through all this stuff, because from the looks of these, I'm not sure that we are. So if you could answer some of that, that would be great. Thank you.
So through you, Madam Chair. So again, in terms of, I guess, the appropriate response to the question, so we do work closely with the local municipal staff, not only to ensure that we are identifying the correct strategic growth areas and urban nodes, community nodes, and town centers based on some of the local visioning and exercises that's undertaken. We also work closely with them to ensure that some of the implementation planning work is reflected in terms of, ensuring that we set the appropriate minimum density targets that, for the most part, align with some of the character areas and figures that are provided in the local official plans to ensure that we are tracking along the right process. With respect to, I guess, broader coordination to ensuring we have the right areas, we do work to establish minimum density targets, but what we kind of mentioned in the presentation is that, these areas have an opportunity to become complete communities, to live, work, and play. And a part of that work is working with locals on implementation in terms of the land use policies that will guide development and setting your minimum densities. And in the case of major transit station areas, the ability to set the minimum height requirements in some cases. So there are a lot of strategic growth areas across the region. They'll all develop at their own pace and time based on infrastructure availability, supporting amenities, and other key factors. So it's not necessarily build high density just for the sake of density, but we are definitely looking to see that complete communities are developed, recognizing that I think Mississauga and Brampton are undertaking different visioning exercises around 15-minute communities. And that's something that we are aware of and we recognize in terms of the implementation plan and work. Sorry. Someone jumped on. Oh, so did I?
Sorry, go ahead. And I guess I'm not sure if you're done or whatever, but just one follow-up, if I could make, Duran, is if you could follow back with my office, and I'd prefer, I'd actually would like an update briefing on what's been done so far. Thank you.
Councillor Starr.
Yeah, just a real quick question, Duran. In your weekly or monthly meetings and your deliberations, do you have a listing or a priority, a matrix chart, whatever it says that here's what's happening in Peel, and okay, staff, here's what we look at insofar as what's important? And I don't mean that, but what is a priority in planning and engineering from your perspective? I know it's probably a tough question, but because it's happening in 3 municipalities, but when you're putting your workload together for the next 2 to 5 years, what do you look at?
I think I'll defer that strategic question to Adrian. He's available.
Yeah, and I would say that we are fortunate in Peel to have a number of forums that we can engage in those conversations with our local partners. You're aware, I think, that council established our growth management program a few years ago, where we have regular meetings of an intermunicipal working group, where not just planning staff, but staff from planning, from engineering, from finance get together on a regular basis and talk about our work plans and what's coming up. What are the issues of the day? And we also have a technical advisory committee where the planning staff get together. We have a planning group that we meet with to support the OP program, and many of the issues that that council's asking about, that some of our delegations asked about, are the real tough questions that we wrestle with. And there's the technical pieces and the policy pieces that go along with that, as well as sort of trying to factor some of that into our day-to-day work, and also trying to be I would say these days, we're looking beyond just kind of policies and research themselves, but to look at what can we actually influence in terms of affecting things on the ground in the near term in implementation, right? What kind of gates or requirements to the process can we add? What can we do as a region with tools like the one that was at council just last week on looking at financial incentives to support office, because we know we're not, at a policy level, we're not hitting our, and a growth management level, we're not hitting our targets on employment. So it's, you got a research analysis, and then what can we actually implement as a tool? So definitely have those conversations, and it's a bit of a moving target, of course, but something we're trying to manage.
Okay, Ron. We're good?
That's fine. Thank you.
Thank you. I have some very quick questions. If you go to slide 7, you're showing 60%, 15, 25, and all the numbers for the various types of housing. What you're not showing us is any sort of direction as to where they'd be going. For example, are we going to be putting some high rise into Caledon? Do you have projections?
Sorry to you, Madam Chair. So we do have, behind the scenes, we do have a unit mix broken down in terms of the share of singles, row, and towns that would be projected to be allocated to each municipality.
Madam Chair, I'm going to jump in. The next report explains that a little bit better. The next report, there was a consultant's report. It really explains it a little bit better.
I understand that. The next report is going to be the next meeting. We don't have time today. We've already gone over time. So
fair enough.
If you could, Duran, give us that back information at the next meeting when we're doing some of this.
Absolutely.
Steph, I have a pile of questions, and I'm not going to get into it right now because we're already at 25 minutes over time. What I'm going to ask you to do, Stephanie, for future meetings, we've never been under 3 hours, 2.5 hours. So if you could book 3 meetings for us in future, that's the first one. The second one is 48 hours for delegations and 48 hours for receipt of any letters. I would appreciate that. I don't know if you need a formal motion for it. And let's just quickly move receipt of this report for Duran. Paul, will you move that? All right, Ron Starr will move it. Anybody opposed? Okay, thank you. What I'm going to do to organize the rest of this meeting, with your permission, is I'm going to move 5.3 to a future meeting. It's very intense. It's a lot of information, and I don't want to rush through it. On 5.4, I'd like to move that as well to the next meeting, unless there's some urgency to it, which I don't think there is. 5.5, the letter's already been sent. That's on Greenbelt. So Councillor Vincente, would you move that for receipt for me now? Any objection?
Councillor Parrish, 5.5 is a recommendation.
Then move it to the next meeting.
Next meeting, okay.
And the CVC report has already, the letter's already been sent, it's attached. Paul, can you move that one for receipt? Any objections? Okay, that one's received. The 2020 performance in DCs, I think, is a really significant report. And I was going to suggest we move it to the next regional council meeting. I think it's important to all councillors to get that information. Alan, you'll move that to the next council meeting. Any objections? Seeing none. 5.8 will move to the next meeting. Ron Starr will move that for me. Any objections? And 6.1 is a fabulous letter from Credit Valley Conservation. It's amazing. It's already been sent off. Alan, could you move receipt of that, please? Seeing no objections. 6.2, I was told
Excuse me, Chair. Sorry, Chair.
Yes.
Regarding item 6.2, I know we have no time. I was wondering to staff, I'd like to move motion specifically on, if you look at 6.2, page 2, and they talk about the servicing. So not to get into a lot of questions, can staff bring a report back specifically on what they're claiming in terms of what can be serviced and the availability of infrastructure for to access the water supply and so on. Can we get something, a report back?
Adrian?
Through you, Madam Chair, definitely that is something that this is a comment about the settlement boundary expansion work, and part of that further work includes more detail on the servicing of the different areas. So that will be coming back to you.
Okay, and then specifically addressed to this particular.
Yeah, we'll make sure it incorporates response to and to the issues raised in the letter. Yeah.
Thank you. So thank you, Martin. That's been moved. Any objections? Man, we should run the rest of the meeting like this. And then we've just got some more stuff at the back to receive the City of Hamilton and Halton's motions, etc. Someone move receipt of all that. Councillor Ennis, thank you. I could see your hand waving. All those in favor or no objections? I want to actually make a comment. If we didn't have this committee and the opportunity to ask all these detailed questions, could you imagine the onerous meetings we'd be having at the region? So I really appreciate the work that's going into this by the staff, and I appreciate the attendance by our councillors. This is a great opportunity for us to get into the weeds on this stuff. Councillor Mayor Thompson?
Yes, can I ask, our next meeting is until June 3rd. Is there any way we can get one in May? Carolyn, we got a lot of stuff on our plate. We almost need to add a meeting. I'm sorry. This is important.
Stephanie, can you see if you can work one in for us?
Yes, I can look at the schedule, and if there's an available spot, we'll book a meeting, a 3-hour meeting at the committee's request.
Thank you, and thanks for bringing that up, Alan. I was going to do it. I've been sounding pretty bossy the last 5 minutes, so it's good that you did it. Okay, is everybody happy with today? And we're going to
just a minute. Sorry, just a minute, Councillor Parrish. There are 2 meetings scheduled for June, and one conflicts with the FCM conference, which is June 3rd, and the alternate date is June 17th. And I will request Adrian to give comments for those particular months, those 2 meetings.
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair. So my understanding is that we originally set the 2 dates, with June 3rd being potentially in conflict with FCM. So we thought we better hold another date on the 17th. My understanding is it doesn't look like FCM will be an in-person attendance anyway. I'm expecting it's most likely to be virtual. So and given the comments already and the amount of material that we've got to go through, if we want to use and hold the 2 dates, I'm sure there's lots of material, but up to the committee. If folks are attending FCM and we need to squeeze it into the 17th, I guess we'll try. But either way.
Okay, what we'll do, Stephanie, is we're going to do a poll of all the council members, not just the ones that are on the committee, but there are other people who are interested in attending. So if we could do a quick poll on the June 3rd date, how many people are going virtually or otherwise to FCM? If it's clear, I'll keep it. And then we'll also keep the 17th. And if you could find something middle of May, if we have June 3rd, middle of May isn't as crucial. So we'll do that. Okay, Stephanie? Yes. Are we giving you much here? Are you using your head spinning? Mine.
I'll check the schedule and get back to you.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And Mr. Vice Chair, would you like to move adjournment? All those in favor this time? Thank you very much, everybody, today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you.
Good meeting. Good meeting, Madam Chair. You got us through.